Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this training about an introduction to mango production. I'm very looking forward to explaining some of the basics of mango production to you today and go through some of the key elements that are required to get started in production. So without further ado, the purpose of this training is to kind of introduce broadly how the mango value chain works in Malawi, how is it structured, to understand what you're going to need to get started in mango production, familiarize yourself with the mango production system, bearing in mind it's not possible to cover a lot of the technical things in this presentation, but we can work in more detail in the future on that. Importantly, identify what are the common mistakes that we see. What things do we see that farmers do which are reducing their profitability, that are slowing down their establishment? And then to develop a kind of effective farm strategy. So where would your farm be to supply a market? Very important because that will determine your revenue and also how sustainable your farm is. So in terms of how we approach understanding what crop we're growing, it's important to understand how the mango sector works, and importantly how the mango sector works in Malawi. Firstly, there's a number of tree crops that are suggested to be highly suitable for Malawi. One of which is mango, which is more nascent industry, hasn't got as many players as other agribusinesses. And macadamia. Now, macadamia is obviously a very successful export crop and has been promoted by our project as well. But the reality is, mango is a far easier crop to grow. It's easier to establish, it's easier to grow, it's less technically demanding. So in that way, is a good crop to choose. Clearly, with irrigation, your yields are much higher. You get better establishments. So this is something that you really do need to consider seriously before you start on selecting farm locations and how you design and build up your farm. Key is it's a highly perishable product. When you harvest it, it's very important for its final market, and it needs to move to that market or off-taker very, very quickly. We're talking 24 hours, ideally less, maximum 36 hours. So because of this, you really do need to think about where you are in terms of your market and understand the logistics, and also sizing your farm so that you can have numerous consignments to the factory. We usually see that throughout Africa, East Africa, West Africa, there's quite a wide range of farm sizes, but the ones that are most successful are in the 3 to 8 hectare range. Basically, you don't see very many very large farms because they find it very difficult to manage the perishability, coordinate the harvest. Yeah, it's very seasonal crop. It's got a highly limited local market. So this means that you can grow this crop and you can sell it to the local market. However, there'll be lots of other people trying to do that as well, and the local market will get saturated. So what we see in most origins like Kenya, Uganda, Ghana, Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, all these places, is that farms generally supply multiple markets. They'll sell a bit to the local market, probably at quite a high price, and they'll aim to sell a bulk of crop to a formal market for a lower price. Kind of sounds counterintuitive, but with mango production, it's important to find a market for your whole crop, and you'll make more money. Even if you sell some at a higher price, some at a lower price, overall, it's better for you to sell everything at all. Going to the formal markets and the formal off-takers, globally, there's a very strong demand for dried mango and mango products in general. These are part of snack culture. and demand for them is going up and is going to continue to go up. And also demand in the developing world is also going up. Dried mango is an ideal product for Malawi. It can be processed, it can be stored, it's more flexible in terms of quality standards and specifications. Makes it a good product for mid-sized farmers. And if you look at Africa commercial mango production overall, dried is becoming and has become pretty much the dominant value chain for African mango. Sure, some is fresh exported, but this is a small proportion of the total crop. Therefore, drying enables your crop to reach a formal market and is good for the country to encourage exports. Mango is highly seasonal, and you need strategies to manage this, because if you produce your crop at the same time as everybody else is producing their crop, that suppresses the price and increases the risk you won't sell. So you need strategies to ensure that your season is distributed as long as possible. The extension of the season increases the size of the market for the crop and therefore grows your business just by producing crop at different times. It's important to realize that you cannot work completely in isolation. There are a number of growing areas already identified and established. The main of which is kind of like this triangle between Salima, Lilongwe, and Zalewa. There are also plantings going on in Kasungu. Lower Shiri Valley has also seen some additional plantings recently. And then there are some plantings, kind of smaller ones at higher altitudes in the northern region and also in the northern lakeshore. Now, if you're starting out in mango production, it's really important to go to areas or to go to places where there are other farmers doing this as well. And the reason for this is that they have experience that they can share with you. They know the phenology of the crop in that area. And as I said, like, the timing of your crop is really important for marketing. So understanding the phenology, so when fruit will come, is really important. And that's very specific to specific areas. I'll go into that a bit more later. But also scale. Your mango production doesn't all come at the same time. You'll be harvesting over 3, 4, maybe even 5 weeks, and do 2 or 3 harvest rounds to get your maximum amount of crop for sale at a specification, so a level of maturity. So unless you have got neighbours or people in your vicinity who also are harvesting, it's difficult to aggregate the volumes to make going to the processing factory or the off-taker cost effective. You don't want to be sending half loads because it will just raise your costs of production. Mango in Malawi is already established as a crop. It's grown under a number of different models, from large-scale farms doing professionally managed irrigated mangoes through to mid-sized farmers who are doing a pretty good job, smallholders through village orchards, and this is what kind of makes up the main production base. We estimate there's about 1,000 hectares of improved quality, improved varieties under commercial management in the country. That ignores little plantings which are not really coming to market, but on ones that are supplying formal markets and processors. We see that there is capacity in the country to plant about 250,000 trees a year, which means it's been growing. And we see, although there's been a couple of big investments by companies such as Malawi Mangoes in their processing facility and their farm, we see that the majority of investments are being made by Malawians in these mid-sized farmer kind of categories. And as a project, we principally support the development and the improvement of the production system with mid-sized farmers, because we feel that this has got the most potential to grow the industry quickly and effectively. So varieties is something that we are asked about a lot, and there is it's kind of a difficult question to give you an answer, do this, don't do this, but there are things that you need to understand in order to make the decision about what varieties are best and most suited for you. Firstly, Malawi is actually, I think, listed as one of the biggest mango producers in the world. However, 99.9% of these are local varieties, which are in general unsuitable for processing and export, although there has been work done commercially on dodo and drying of dodo, which looks very promising. Still, it's the smaller, more fibrous mangoes which are the dominant form. These fibrous mangoes are unsuitable for drying, they're unsuitable for pulping, and they can't be sold as fresh. So they're not really a commercializable product, which is why you haven't seen people commercializing them. Main reason for this is that apart from the fiber, they've got very variable taste, color, sugar levels. They present a phytosanitary risk. By this we mean it potentially could have the presence of foreign bodies in the fruit, which means if you export it, it becomes a major regulatory problem. This is mainly down to fruit fly and seed weevil, and there's basically no market demand for these local varieties. So you have to plant recognized varieties, because remember, whatever you plant, it has to be for a market. So you have to plant what the market wants. It's really important. It's like, as a farmer, you're not planting what you want, you're planting to make money. And to make money, you have to plant something that someone's going to want to buy. So globally, the varieties that are in the biggest demand across dried, fresh, everything is Kent, Keat. And then secondary to that, Palmer, Brooks and Hayden, which is like there's Tommy Atkins as well, which is widely planted in Malawi. But I'll go into some of the limitations for that later. So commercial varieties, they come from a very small set of selections. There was a set of crosses that were done between Caribbean and Indian varieties in the kind of like the early 20th century, and these produced essentially the commercial mango production. So there was a second set of selections like in the 30s and 40s, or rather the 20s and 30s, and they selected Kent, Keat, Brooks. Tommy Atkins was selected in 1922, Palmer. All these are kind of the backbone of the industry. So why do you need commercial varieties? Because they're predictable and they're known. They're known to the market and they're known to agronomists. This means that the production system can be defined and that people can advise you about how to grow the crop. Now, if you start growing varieties that no one knows anything about, it's much more difficult to advise. They've also got consistent colour, taste and texture. Final clients in Europe, America, China, they all are familiar with this. Also, probably in addition to that, and maybe not important, is that because mango is so seasonal, they source crop from many different countries. If I have a mango product in a supermarket, I want to have that mango product available to my customers year round. So to do that, I may have to be buying from one supplier in Brazil for these months, one supplier in Chile for these months, one supplier in South Africa for these months, and so on and so on. So by you producing the same variety as other origins, you can fit in to the people who will be making the decisions of what to buy. If you plant something and try and sell something that they don't want, they're not going to buy it. So this is why these improved varieties are important and why you should be planting them over anything else. All right. So you cannot get out more than you put in. So you can't reap You can only reap what you sow. This means that the more energy you put into the production system, the more return you get from it. What do I mean by this? So if we look at this slide here, this is the mango production from 1 hectare. So we see, and this is validated by the industry in Malawi, and our mid-sized farmers kind of confirm this, in that if you are doing like low input, low output farming, like a smallholder, very low density, 100 or even less trees per hectare, not really using inputs, not really getting much advice, you're really only going to be, you'll be lucky to get 5 tons commercial yield per hectare. If we make the production system a bit more commercially orientated, we introduce some staffing, some inputs, we start to get up to like 8 or maybe even 8 tons a hectare, rain-fed system, that jumps to 15 tons a hectare if we're looking at an irrigated system. And then a professionally managed farm under ideal conditions can be getting up to 25, 26, 28 tons a hectare per year. Now this is a massive difference. So one thing about tree crops in general is that the more knowledge you have, the better able you are to get more out of the trees. And you can't achieve that by cutting big corners. You can't achieve that without using inputs. You can't achieve that without using irrigation. So we see that the profitability ranges from about $500 a hectare up to $7,000 per hectare per year. Okay, and you know this is a mass. So we can increase productivity by up to 30%, up to 30 times, and profitability by up to 14 times. So it just shows, say, the more you put in, the more you can get out. You can't achieve these type of yields without investing in inputs, just not possible. So, but also making the right decisions on the farm. This slide details some of the differences between the different farm types and what the actual difference is. It's basically more mechanical, better expertise, investing in expertise that gets you like analyzing your data, keeping records, all this stuff. All right. So the timing of the harvest will be important for what market you access. So what the prices are, what the demand is, who your competition is. So phenology is a really important thing to get your head around. Phenology is set by the climate, essentially. So phenology is the study of periodic events in biological life cycles. And these are influenced by the season and variations in climate. So if we look at this cycle of the year, if we think of the seasons, like we know from your own observations that mangoes will flower during the winter. They fruit towards the end of the year into the early year. Like so, harvest is usually naturally finished on local varieties by early January, maybe even in December, depending on the year. So their flowering is being triggered by low temperatures. Flowering then sets fruiting, harvesting then resets the cycle again. Yeah, so it just goes round and round and round. And stress and water availability determines flowering in mango. But why is phenology so important to you as a farmer? So yeah, so if everyone plants the same variety in the same place, it means that all the production will come at the same time. So it's really important that production is spread out geographically and over a number of different varieties. 80, 85, maybe even 90% of the production base in Malawi is Tommy Atkins. and it's spread over a kind of modest ecological zone, which means we can start getting Tommy at, I believe, sort of like early November, and then it's finished by the end of December, early January. And what this means is there's a lot of competition for this crop. And if more people start to see, Tommy Atkins grows well and it's got a market, so I'm going to plant Tommy Atkins as well. And then you plant Tommy Atkins and your crop comes to market and other people have made the same decision. It means a lot of crop will come to market at the same time, which leads to oversupply and lower prices and difficulty selling, all big problems for farmers. So this requires a bit of planning and coordination at national level. It needs to promote areas of planting that extend the harvest, plant varieties to extend the harvest, and if it's well managed, this could double the length of the season, double the potential volumes that could go into drying capacity, which means that you could double the potential exports. So it's really important to think about the phenology, talk to your neighbours, talk to other people in your area, come and talk to agronomists about this and off-takers to see where their supply gaps are. And if I was to plant a mango farm myself in Malawi, I would be looking for late season crop. I would be aiming to get that mid to late season. I would ignore the early season completely because that's going to be saturated with all the crop coming to market, and I would go for mid to late season because it's very likely that you will fill that supply gap and extend out the season, and you'll have a lot of people coming for your crop, local market and formal market. So that's where I would go. So Malawi's geography really helps. Its potential extension for mango production. It has a very long north-south axis, and the Lakeshore and Shiri Valley are very suitable for mango production because of their high temperatures. So we've got a situation where north to south in Malawi in general, you can grow mangoes. So if we are all familiar with Malawi and the Lakeshore and the different agricultural environments. So we have like a situation where obviously the centre of the industry is around Salima, but the whole of the Lakeshore is kind of suitable for mango production, as is the Shiri Valley. The hot temperatures, well, the rain comes earlier, the cold comes earlier, and the further south you are. So we have got a situation where rain and the season is at least 2 or 3 weeks earlier in the south and compared to the north. So we've got, imagine if we plant some trees of Tommy Atkins down here, some trees right at the north and some in the middle, naturally their flowering and their production would be staggered by about 6 weeks. 4 to 6 weeks, something like that, which is really useful. Also, Malawi has got a big elevation change between the lake, escarpment areas, and even more upland areas. So we see between Tommy planted at the Lakeshore and around the Longway, we get a 2 or 3 week difference in flowering and crop development. Obviously, the hotter it is, the faster the fruit develops, the faster it matures, and the earlier it can be harvested. So there's a slight acceleration in the production. Likewise, if you go to somewhere like Mzuzu or a higher altitude area, you do see mango produced viably, but the fruit production is very slow, and it can actually produce way into like May, June, these big varieties. So what my point is here is that you can use Malawi's geography to spread out the season. In many other origins, what they have to do is they have to use quite advanced agronomic techniques to manipulate the flowering so they stagger and they can push and pull the flowering. Now that's more advanced than Malawi is at the moment. So I think even just geographically you can do a lot. You're not as close to processing if you're in the far north or the far south. That's the only other observation there, but it is possible. Yeah, so we can see this altitude shift here, and we can see the temperature difference, mean annual temperature differences between the different bits of Malawi here. Okay. Um, so the current production is insufficient to really fulfill the demand that's created by the existing local market plus plus processing capacity. So we estimate that there is about 6 weeks of factory capacity which is reached, and a further 4 where it's kind of marginal based on local market demand, the season, and local market can account for 25 or 30% of the total production of these varieties. Could actually be a bit higher than that. 60% of it is located in Salima, and as I said, like 85% Tommy Atkins. So we have a narrow, what I would call a narrow production base. We've got overall shortfall in volumes, and the volumes that we do have are kind of falling disproportionately in quite a small season, which means if we're going to change the situation, we want to extend out the season so a couple of weeks earlier and lots of weeks later, because it's easier with Tommy Atkins is an early season variety. We need to incorporate more mid and late season varieties such as Kent, Keat, Brooks, Hayden. All these other varieties are mid and late season. So we conducted a piece of work on this to show how we could extend the factory capacity to 18 weeks. Local market still accounts for a pretty significant proportion, but it's much more distributed across the whole country. And also that you incorporate a much higher proportion of mid and late season variety. But there is potentially a much longer season in Malawi. And the issue with late season varieties in Malawi's case is that they will require a more advanced production system to support. By this I mean, if you think of Tommy, by December you haven't really had a lot of rainfall, so you're not getting a lot of fungal issues, you're not getting a lot of fruit fly issues at this stage. But the later you go, the more into the rains you'll become when you're harvesting, and that will become more of an issue. So late season is not without additional risks, but the commercial case is clear and it's worked everywhere else, so there's no reason to believe it wouldn't work in Malawi. So how do we get you started in mango production? After that kind of bit of an overview of some of the key issues with the value chain, is the big decisions that you're going to have to make as a farmer. Are you going to be an irrigated or a rain-fed farm? It's got a big impact on the cost of production, but also the potential return from the farm. What sort of level of intensity of production system? Are you looking to get like technicians to help you run the farm? You're going to invest in inputs and people to run the farm to get the most out of it, or are you going to have a less intensive approach? Also, from a personal, like what your level of commitment is. Are you full-time? Do you live on the farm? Do you live off the farm? If you don't live at the farm, you're going to have to get a manager. Anything above 3, 4, 5 hectares, you're going to have to get a manager to manage it. This is a crop that requires observation, day-to-day handling. If you want the results, you're going to have to either supervise it yourself or get someone else to supervise it for you. One thing that we see a lot of is different types of farmers. Some, often younger farmers, entrepreneurial farmers, are looking for like an active income, something that's going to generate income from them as much as possible. Others, you see, they want to make an investment to get some passive income, and they're generally older farmers looking to retire or looking to get some form of income in addition to a salary. And how much money to invest. I will give you some figures at the end of this presentation. Okay. Right, establishment decisions. are long term in their effect, and they're very difficult to change later. So there's a number of things that you have to really think about before you start, and this comes back to like hindsight. Sorry, foresight is much more valuable than hindsight. Many of these decisions will be made at a point where you're not really fully aware of their implications. Some things may not seem to make much sense to you, but these key decisions need to be made, and yeah, the repercussions are very large. So varieties, if you get it right, you have a market for your fruit, and if you get it wrong, you will find it very difficult to sell your fruit, and it will probably attract quite low prices. By this I mean, like, don't plant what everyone else is planting. Try and get some season extension in there, but only plant things that people want to buy. Rain-fed or irrigated. If it's irrigated, you will radically increase your yield, and you'll have to develop a smaller area to generate the same amount of revenue and profit. That's also important. Spacing. How dense you want your orchards. Now, if you've got limited space, or you don't want to develop a very large farm, you want to go dense planting, these increase the returns earlier, your break even becomes earlier, and also you've got a lot of costs that are area based, things like slashing, weed control, water, just the time required to manage a place. And a lot of, if you look at modern farms, they're generally smaller and more intensively managed. It's much better to have 5 hectares managed really well than 20 hectares not managed well at all. And this radically reduces the cost of production. To open up 20 hectares, to plant 20 hectares, to slash 20 hectares is a big effort. And my recommendation is, particularly if land prices are high or restricted, you've got to intensify. So you're talking like 400, 500 trees a hectare. Yeah. Rate of establishment. Often you see people doing things in like they plant something, they wait a couple of years, they plant something else, they plant something else. So what I would advise on this is that if you have a project, you've got to really think of the implications of that. I would plant as much as you can as early as possible, because then, or like maybe you have a 3-year development plan. So you do some initial plantings and then 2 big plantings. You finish your establishment before you get your production. And this is important because you don't want to be learning, still be establishing trees while you're doing your first harvests. Yeah. Classic. Buy good quality seedlings. Producing your own seedlings does not save you any money at all. I would say very rarely have I seen farms that have successfully reduced their cost of production by producing their own seedlings. This may seem like counterintuitive. Problem is that grafting is a skill. You want to get as healthy seedlings as possible to your field, and you want to not plant poor quality seedlings because you don't want gaps in your orchard. So for every tree that dies, you've got a space in your orchard that you've paid for, you have to replant. The trees get overshadowed by other trees, and it basically has a long-term impact. What you want to do is plant a block of good quality seedlings. They all survive. They will establish more quickly. You can save yourself 1 to 2 years by getting good quality seedlings. Irrigation makes a massive difference because in Malawi we get very good flowering. It's associated with the winter, and then the crop development takes place from August, September, October, November, December, depending on the variety. This all happens in the dry season. So if you give it water at this stage, the fruit size is much bigger and you get less fruit drop. This means that your yields become much, much higher. You've got a very good growing environment in Malawi in terms of pest and disease, but you need to supply water to it, because less water means smaller fruit means more reject. Yeah. intercropping is another question, is another area we get a lot of questions about at the project. So often farmers that have got an idea to intercrop on a permanent basis, they plant their trees further apart. So instead of doing a spacing of like 6 or 8 meters, you see spacings of 10 meters for them to kind of plant an intercrop in between. This reduces the overall density of the orchard, so there'll be a point at which it's going to be difficult to sustain an intercrop. The other thing is that if we think of the timing of when you harvest mango, it's going to be like November, December, January, February. These are points of the year where you're going to have other crops in the field, rain-fed crops, legumes, maize, whatever it is. You're going to have other crops in there, which makes the operations more difficult to manage. You can have potential damage to the roots from mechanical damage from kudzus. You won't be able to access with a tractor to spray. This is a good option maybe for 3 to 5 years, but better to do it in another part of the farm after then. That's the advice on that. You don't, unless you really have to, I would say plan to cycle out your intercrops after year 5. Another area where as an agronomist I have a lot of debates with farmers about is tree size. Now, there's a general perception big trees mean more fruit, which is true up to a point. A bigger tree will have more fruit than a smaller tree. But in the same area, a small tree, of which there'll be 4, 5, 6, depending on your spacing, those 6 trees together will produce more than a large tree. First point. Second point, mango trees, if left to grow, will grow very large, so they need to be actively managed. Small trees can be harvested easily. Large trees can't be harvested. How do you harvest fruit without damaging it so far up? You can apply fertilizers more easily if it's canopy-based fertilizers, foliar fertilizers. Apply things like fungicides, insecticides across the whole canopy if they're small. If they're large, you can't implement the production system, and because of that, you get lower quality and lower productivity. Small trees are essential in any modern orchard production system. Small, high density. But to achieve this, they need to be trained from establishment. So you train the trees from year 1, you tip them every once, twice, sometimes even 3 times a year, so they get a nice, dense, small canopy, and then you remove 20 to 25% of the canopy every single year to keep it small and compact. This is by far the best way to make your orchard sustainable and productive. It's very low cost and has a big impact. There's more kind of points on this here for you to refer to later if you would like. So the mango management calendar is very much linked to the phenology, and so in general, if I take you through the year, if we start, the start of the production cycle is once your crop has been harvested, that then initiates the next production cycle. After your harvest has been finished, you then prune the trees, as per I just said, taking 20 to 25% of the canopy, so a leading branch. That means that the whole canopy is turned over every 4 or 5 years. You mulch and compost the trees. Mulching, like for any tree crop and orchard crop, is really important. If you could chip any prunings and clippings and stuff, chip it down low. You can make compost heaps. If you're using intercrops, you can use biomass. If you add mulch and compost every single year, you will increase the organic matter content of the soil, you reduce water stress, you improve soil health, you improve root health, you improve the nutrient holding capacity of the orchard, and is very low cost for you. So I would say mulching and composting across the whole area of the root zone, super important. So after that, the rains go out, you've pruned the tree, and then you get a root flush as the tree kind of like adapts to that, and then you start to look at a flowering to be initiated like in June, July, once you've had 3 months maybe of dry weather. Obviously, where you get a delayed winter or you get late rains, that can be pushed back. Yeah, so you need to be a bit careful with that. But when your flowering takes place, you should record, because you'll be able to tell when your harvest will be. But basically, you go through a cycle of giving the tree what it needs. You'd probably give it another mulch, like during the winter, so that the soil is covered for the dry season to reduce nutritional stress and water stress. And you start applying foliar and granular fertilizers to feed the tree through the production cycle. So its peak demand for nutrition is like at this phase, like kind of like flowering, fruit development, because it's using a lot of nutrient to develop the crop. The more you can give it, then the higher the yields potentially could be. If you have an irrigation system, you don't use it all year round. You wait to see the flowering, and once you start to see the early fruit set, so those pea-sized mango, that's when you switch your irrigation system on, because that then helps develop the fruit to a large size and to retain as much fruit as possible. And then fruit fly control. You should also be doing fungal applications potentially at this time, particularly if you're in a highly humid area, or you start seeing flower blights. And the thing from July, August through to harvest, you're really looking to minimize the stress on the tree. And that's more or less the production system. I mean, you can be quite perspicacious as long as you get your good strategic decisions right. This can go absolutely fine. All right, so one thing that I've been asked to do is to give you an idea of the costs. Okay, can see that my head covers some of these figures, so I will move that in a minute. But to give you an idea, this is all for 1 hectare planted at 400 trees a hectare, which is like 5 by 5, which is quite dense. So this is like the maximum. You can probably reduce these figures a little bit. Okay, so seedlings on today's you should be aiming to spend about maybe up to 2.5 million per hectare, which is about $1,200 on the seedlings, the land prep with the pits, getting some soil testing done, all that. Yeah, that's buying seedlings from a recognized nursery and getting them to your farm, so delivery to farm. Yeah, which can be quite expensive. The two areas that I see under budgeted, like people generally gravitate towards buying seedlings, clearing land and doing land prep, because they think, then I've got something in the bank, I've got something that I can hold on to. But often where that is really capitalized on is in the staffing and the inputs. So people underestimate the inputs and the people to actually do things properly. So this represents kind of like an all-in inputs and staff packaging. We figure it out. We have like a budget per tree, basically. So for staffing, obviously it increases in time, because as time goes on, as the trees get bigger, you need more inputs, and it's more difficult to manage the trees, so you need more people. Things like harvesting come in, like it becomes more expensive to manage once the trees are mature. So that's why we see ranges here. So we range from about 1,750 kwacha to 5,000 kwacha per tree in staffing, and inputs 3,500 to 8,500. Again, this is like doing it properly. You could probably reduce this somewhat, but not completely. This means that in order to get your orchard planted to production would cost you about $8,500. Okay, plus the establishment. So we're looking at, for a rain-fed farm, about $10,000 or 16 million to bring it into production the first 5 years. All right, let's say $10,000 a hectare. Okay, but then if you want to do irrigation, that's obviously going to come on top of that, and that can add costs significantly. So often we see people wanting to do a borehole. Now, boreholes are great, but they do have limitations. From our own research, we think that really one borehole is only sufficient to irrigate 2 hectares at full production. You could use one borehole to do more hectares to start with and then add more boreholes later, but you'd need a geophysical survey to determine that, and there's obviously some risks to do with the drilling and stuff and getting enough borehole yield. So we generally say that for farms that are under 10 hectares, boreholes is a good option, potentially. And each borehole does about 2 hectares, depending on the site. So we figure that's about $6,000 or just over 10 million kwacha per hectare. Now, actually, a much better water resource for mango and for macadamia, but for mango, is to use either a river, perennial river, or a dam. This means that you can go much higher in terms of your potential areas. Also, you can be guaranteed of water supply, whereas boreholes can over time have a tendency to go dry. Their yields can become lower in the dry season, which is when you need the water the most. So boreholes are not without risk, and also the cost of the pumps and the panels becomes high, and the system becomes more complex to run 5 sets of pumps and towers and everything. So it's very equipment heavy. We, if possible, site farms near rivers or with potential for dams, because this can actually reduce the costs considerably. And then you've got the cost, apart from water resource development, you've got water, like actually how to deliver the water. We generally see 2 types of systems with mid-sized farmers. One, which is the most popular, is drip irrigation. This costs about $2,500 to $3,000 a hectare to install, and drip lines. Yeah, this installs the main lines, the laterals, and the drip lines. That's how much it costs. Drip lines, I would say, probably would be my personal choice if I was going to do these, but often you see drippers. Now, drippers are very difficult to manage. They're very labor intensive to keep running, and irrigation systems like this are prone to it's difficult to pick up where it stopped working. Okay. Another system which is less complex to run and manage and maintain, although it's more labor intensive to operate, is hose and basin. So this is where you have taps all over the farm, and you're literally just connecting the system up to hose pipes. And an irrigated system, depending on the approach you take, will cost from including the land prep and the seedlings and the inputs and stuff. I think you're looking at something between $15,000 and maybe $20,000 to bring it to production. All right. Obviously, these are very high. So in terms of what mistakes we see time and time again. We see uneven establishment. So this is where, like, we've got areas of the farm or the field where the trees have died. They've been replaced, usually because of poor quality seedlings, or we've got a very slow establishment where a lot of trees are not growing well because the seedlings have not been good quality. This overall reduces productivity, pushes back your break even by a number of years, and means that the farm is underperforming. So yeah, I would definitely recommend investing in good quality seedlings. The other thing is that if you buy them from someone else, you can demand they're of a certain quality. If you produce them yourself, you'll always be trying to plant out as many as you can. The other thing about buying seedlings is you can plan. If you plan to plant 2,000 seedlings, you order 2,000 seedlings and you receive 2,000 seedlings. If you propagate them yourself, that may change. So if you want to implement your plan like you want to, you order seedlings. Seedlings also, if you do them on the farm, is a distraction. It's yet another thing to do on the farm when there's lots of other work to do on the farm. Yeah, just as a tip. The majority of farmers we see have exactly the same strategy, or in fact no strategy at all. They basically do what everyone else is doing, which is plant Tommy in existing areas. This will inevitably lead to an oversupply and lower prices. So as said before, you need to think about what strategy you want to go for and pursue it on a long-term basis. These are long-term decisions with long-term repercussions. Prioritizing tree numbers and large areas. This is something we commonly see. Like, so someone will try and plant an area much bigger than they can feasibly manage well. And this is a really, really important thing, because having a large area to manage with low yields and poor quality is a really difficult farming operation to manage. It's much better to manage a small area well than a big area badly. You will make more money for sure, for definite, and you'll have happier staff, happier owners because of it. We also see an underestimation in the amount of work that's required. Some people think that getting into mango is about planting trees. Getting into mango production is about managing trees, not planting them. And to manage the trees effectively, you need to invest in people, their skills and their knowledge, and not undervaluing investment in inputs. Farms that do that well are getting really good results. Farms that don't invest in people and inputs are getting low productivity and low quality, and they find it difficult. So if you want a profitable farm, you have to get the right people there. Irrigation systems, we often see that people rush into doing an irrigation system. They get fed up or they find it difficult to do the irrigation manually, and then they start installing boreholes without having an overall plan. If you're going to do an irrigation system, find an expert, get it properly designed, get a geophysical survey if it's for boreholes, a hydrologist if it's for other water sources. Another thing that we see is that a lot of crop is just waste. People don't selectively harvest, so your mango should be harvested 2, ideally 3, and if you've got several varieties like that, maybe 4 times in the season. So you only pick what meets the specification for the market. Anything that doesn't meet the specification for the market is essentially waste. So undersized, mechanically damaged, so poor harvesting practices. You've done all the cost of establishing the inputs, the staffing, and then to lose money at that last stage doesn't really seem to make much sense to me. So these are all areas that MVC project works on extensively with farmers. We are happy to provide. Okay, so I think in terms of content, that's what I wanted to share with you today. We're very keen to stay in contact with any of you, and we're happy to make other technical resources available to you. If you scan this QR code that's on this page, you'll go to our web page on Mango Technical Resources, where you'll find other training sessions and papers and information about commercializing your mango production. Also, my role is the strategic advisor to the agribusiness and competitiveness team, and I would encourage you all to stay in contact with the project. I have 2 colleagues on the team led by Ampato, and yeah, please get in contact with them. I believe he's with you today. All right, thank you very much.